Hey class, welcome back to our Unit 1 notes, the living world. We're going to continue on with ecosystem diversity, biodiversity, and a little bit of evolution and natural selection here. You can see we're covering a lot of our CED topics in Unit 2 in this section of notes today. To begin with, we're looking at diversity in ecosystems and just simply identifying the big three, the three major types of diversity. We have a great graphic over here in our definitions listed. Understanding that when we refer to diversity, we're talking about the variety of life or living things, but in that definition, we can get more specific and talk about the diversity or variety of ecosystems, which we kind of explored a bit when we're talking about biomes. The diversity of life as species, the different plants and animals that exist in that ecosystem. And then from there, we can even talk about genetic diversity and the idea that within those species, like we have our picture of our chipmunks here, they are genetically different too, and a greater diversity there is beneficial. In general, diversity is a very good thing. All of these are a very good thing, maintaining healthy ecosystems. Biodiversity, what is it when we use this term? We're going to use this term a lot in class. Simply refers to the amount of different species living in an area. You can take a look at our picture here. We talk about richness and evenness and which one is more diverse. More diverse is a function of richness and evenness. All right? Biodiversity leads to this. Right? Greater biodiversity has greater richness, greater evenness. What do we mean by that? Park A or Park B? All right? Which one is more diverse? Looking at this example, you could probably see when you think of diversity, well, Park B is the winner because it has more different types of animals in this case, right? There's a greater diversity. But really think about this when we talk about richness. It's a measure of the number of different species found. How many different species are in Park A? All right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. How many different species are in Park B? 1, 2, 3, 4. So richness is the same in A and B. All right. Evenness. Evenness is what makes Park B more diverse. All right. This is really important here. Population distribution of the species found. Now, that's critical, right? There's only one of these raccoons. There's only one of these possums, one of these squirrels here, and the rest are all deer. So this is mostly a population of deer versus Park B, which is much more evenly split up. We have our 5 squirrels, our 5 deer, our 5 raccoons, our 5 possums, right? So because of the evenness, the biodiversity is much greater in the Park B. Moving on, why is diversity important? When we discuss diversity and its importance, a couple ideas here. More diversity is better for a couple of reasons. Populations can recover more quickly. We have increasing resilience, this idea that ecosystems can recover faster, be more resilient from any kind of disruption, natural disaster, disease, whatever that may be. More diversity helps them bounce back quicker. Less diversity can be trouble for us. It can create things called genetic bottlenecks, or it can be a result of genetic bottlenecks. And small populations will continue to reproduce with little genetic diversity. This can lead to inbreeding, which continues to kind of perpetuate the cycle of a lack of genetic diversity within a population. It reduces resilience in the face of disruptions, and it becomes a problem for us. So what we're talking about in terms of a genetic bottleneck, this is a diverse population right here. Right, that's what we like. A lot of different colors representing diversity. There's some events that takes place, whatever that may be, that eliminates some of that diversity, and then we're left with a population that is not so diverse. Right. From there forward, this was our bottleneck event. Now we have a population that has limited genetic diversity. Distribution of biodiversity is not always equal. It's not always the same. So ecological tolerance is going to discuss like where we find biodiversity in ecosystems, and typically we find that in something called our optimal range. Ecological tolerance basically states that there's a range of conditions acceptable for organisms' ideal survival and ability to survive. And at some point, if you venture outside the optimum range, which is best, you get into the zone of physiological stress, which is not great for survival. And some organisms can survive there on the fringe, on the edge. But most organisms are going to experience signs of stress and poor health. All organisms at some point find a zone of intolerance where they go too far in one way. It's too cold to survive, too acidic to survive, or any of those things that are going to be outside the range will ultimately lead to some kind of shock and death. Biodiversity is also distributed sometimes based on how organisms move and the ecosystems that are there. So we have this theory of island biogeography, which is stating that biodiversity is related to the distribution of the species on the island itself. These can be actual islands or isolated islands. So the idea here is basically that larger islands can support more biodiversity. So this is the number one most diverse. And why is it most diverse? Because it's big and close. All right. This one is right here is small and close, right? So small but also close. So this is going to have a kind of medium amount of diversity. The closer you are to mainland, the easier it is for organisms to travel, right? Talking about the near and far, same concept, right? The closer you are to the mainland, the better the diversity is. So this is our actually number 2 more diverse one because they're super close. This one falls into number 3 for diversity, and this is the worst one. Why is this the worst one? Because this is still small and it's far away. It's the hardest for organisms to get there to this small island. So in essence, larger supports greater diversity, closer allows greater diversity, farther away, less diversity, smaller, less diversity. Islands also tend to have specialist species survive, which is really, they have a specialist niche. They're able to fulfill a very small role, and that typically happens with island organisms because of limited resources and inability to migrate sometimes any further away than they already are. This makes them very vulnerable to any changes in their environment or any disruptions that may occur. Natural selection, how do we get the biodiversity that we have? All right, so we're going to get a little chart here. So talking about biodiversity, we have our before selection. We have a diverse group of organisms here. All the colors represent, we could say, genetic diversity, right? So the original population is going to produce more offspring than can survive, and these offspring have genetic traits. They're from sexual reproduction or just random mutation, but they're different enough. Then we have something happen. Something happens to these organisms that some of them disappear. Selective pressure ensures they can't all survive. So these organisms that have beneficial adaptations, which according to this is red, have increased fitness and will survive. And it doesn't mean they're the strongest necessarily, it just means they're better adapted to survive whatever selective pressures there are. It may be lack of water or access to another resource. And then finally, well, these red ones had better fitness because they had an adaptation. They survive and reproduce, and then ultimately over time our population is a bunch of red ones here. Speciation is a similar concept, but it happens over a long period of time, and it's a gradual change. Barriers between populations reduce or eliminate interbreeding, and then typically we have different kind of populations that form over a long period of time. So original population, somehow this population gets divided, they reproduce and are in isolated pockets, and over time the species diverge and become 2 separate species. They'll be closely related, but they are 2 separate species, and typically because they're surviving in different conditions. So here we see the Central Valley in California separates these salamander species. One is more well adapted along the coastline, one is more well adapted in the mountains. Different situations, So different selective pressures allow different traits to be beneficial. And so these guys are a little skinnier and not camouflaged, survive and reproduce better on the coast because they looked more like a poisonous salamander. And then these ones over here had more spots to blend in the mountain forests, and that was beneficial. So those traits kind of were present in both original populations, but as they migrated, they showed and expressed these different traits based on what was beneficial to survive and reproduce. Biodiversity gives us a lot of value. All right? In environmental science, we categorize this value as ecosystem services. So we have four major terms we need to be able to apply when we learn about biodiversity. We have support systems, cultural, regulating, and provisional. All right. Support and regulating are oftentimes, there's a little bit of a gray area here. That's why I have a gray arrow. There are some people who can tell you that it's right and wrong and perfect, but I will tell you that sometimes there's a little bit of overlap. What we want to try to do is think about support services as being those things that are of some kind of a value to humans. So something like pollination is a support service, helps support us in what we do. The bees certainly don't do pollination to create our food, but if they didn't, there would be billions and billions of dollars worth of stuff we would have to do. Same with plants filtering air and water for us. It's essential in supporting our life and the things we do as humans. Regulating, you could make that same argument too, but understand that these are regulating functions of the ecosystem as a whole. So things like photosynthesis, reducing erosion, and disease protection are all in this regulating service. Cultural are things that are kind of the intangibles that, like the biodiversity is important because I can go for a hike or I can go kayaking. I can learn about it. These are all cultural support services that it has value to us in that way as people. And then finally, provisional, probably the easiest one. Biodiversity provides us with stuff that we use to buy, sell, and build, and things we need to eat. And so food, medicine, resources, goods, lumber, all that stuff. Then finally, there is the intrinsic value. There is, even if we didn't get any of this stuff from biodiversity, even if we didn't have those previous four, some people still argue, well, so what? So biodiversity, our planet, ecosystems have the right to exist. It's an ethical thing, and that humans are responsible for taking care of the planet regardless of what value the biodiversity provides.